With the death of Caesar in 44 BCE, the senatorial class had had enough of him and his dictatorship, and they believed that his death would then set off a new golden era where the senatorial class could reassert its control over this now ever-expanding state that they have with large frontiers, and that somehow Caesar's death was going to sort of be an exclamation point in the return of the large senatorial class to effective power. It didn't work out like that. In the era right after Caesar's death, his nephew, whose name is Octavian, his nephew Octavian now is going to be, well, Octavian was Caesar's grandnephew, but also his adopted son. Many Roman famous men especially, if they did not have a living male heir, would go out and find a male heir and adopt them, even if they were adults. And the idea was that they were going to transfer on their power, their prestige, and everything else to that male member of the family if they had failed to have an adult son that was worthy of such. Octavian is the grandnephew of Julius Caesar and his adopted son. What Octavian is going to do, and you can see in this picture of a statue, he is going to pick up that mantle of authority, that sense that he's going to be in charge, and he wants to take what his father, his adopted father, Julius Caesar, had done and wants to take it to the next level. And this is going to be what's called the Principate, the era of the Principate, where Octavian is now going to be the man in charge. He is going to slowly eliminate as best he can all the enemies of Julius Caesar, and then eliminate anybody else within the Roman class of people at the top who could challenge him, both senatorial as well as military opponents. So in essence, the idea that the Senate, by assassinating Julius Caesar, was going to have the clock roll back and the great Roman Republic would be saved, in essence just ushers in the next series of military confrontations. And now, instead of having Julius Caesar be the focus, it's going to be his son Octavian, who in time will also adopt many of the titles of power, and we'll talk about that in a moment. First thing that Octavian is going to do is he's going to go after all of the enemies of his adopted father. All those who had crossed and transgressed against him, those who had launched into the conspiracy, those who had actively led to the death of Julius Caesar are systematically hounded, tracked down, and arrested, exiled, or in many cases killed. Or the idea here is that there is a certain amount of revenge here, that Octavian is going to use this as an opportunity to eliminate a significant number of people who not only did him and his family a great disfavor by killing his adopted father, but also in that process, he's going to be getting rid of the people who are most opposed to his own power as the inheritor of the tradition from his great nephew or great uncle. All right. One of the things we're going to see in Roman history is the use increasingly of what's called a proscription policy. It's kind of a strange word, but hang with me for a second. Here's what it means. If there's a civil war or a great political debate and a war that breaks out within Rome, what happens is when one party emerges, one group or one person emerges as the victor, what they then started to do is they passed what was called a proscription. They put together a list of people who were their enemies, who were to be exiled or executed or in other ways stripped of all authority and power. Essentially what it was is all those people who came out on the wrong or the losing side of some sort of military or political debate are now legally seen as sort of treasonous and criminals, and then all of their assets and sometimes their lives are taken from them. It is a way to not only go after your enemies, but also to strip them of a significant amount of power that they do have. And this proscription policy is very powerful, and Octavian and his allies use it very well in stripping their potential enemies of land, slaves, and other opportunities overseas, for example, offices that could enrich them and pose a problem for him and his control back home. What will happen now between the death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE and down to about 30 is a time period of great warfare and stress within Rome. There's a lot of different politicians that take on leading roles. What I want to focus on here for a second is the ultimate triumph as the opposition, so to speak, are summarily removed. different generals, different major politicians are in many ways just removed from the scene by the new emerging war leader and political leader. And all of his enemies are now being removed or exposed themselves. And the last two enemies that were significant in opposing him are Antony and Cleopatra. He defeats them in battle, in a major battle off the coast of Greece in 31 BC at a place called Actium. And then Antony and Cleopatra retreat back to Egypt, where she is the last Ptolemaic queen of Egypt. Remember, we had put in the idea that Egypt had been taken over at the end of Alexander's reign, Alexander the Great, by Ptolemy, one of his generals. This is one of his last descendants who is in charge of Egypt, and that's going to be extinguished now as the Romans come in and take over and are going to create Egypt as another province. Mark Antony now, who had gone from being an ally, had gone now from being an ally into being an enemy, and now he is now, of course, been taken out of the scene, so to speak, and eventually is dead in 30 BCE in Egypt. That means now that Egypt is open to more Roman influence, and essentially now Octavian, as he looks around and is starting to take on the titles of Augustus and Caesar and other things and princeps, we'll talk about that in a second, is the quantity that is now the state. There are no other significant politicians or factions who can stop him. His military enemies and political enemies have either died or have been exterminated one way or the other or stripped of their power. So in essence, what happened was the senatorial class that thought by killing Julius Caesar they're going to recreate the Republic, essentially they just set in motion a sort of a speeding up process of hyper-concentrating power into the hands of one man. Octavian now is going to be controlling Rome. And this is where we want to talk for a second. As Octavian expands and takes over more and more offices, he's going to start to be known by the titles that are presented to him or the titles that he ends up taking as he starts to control all of Rome. In some of the more important ones are princeps. What it means is sort of prime man. We're going to corrupt the word later in English into simply prince. Someone who is in charge by virtue of, a monarch or whatever. But nonetheless, the idea here is one person is the prime person in charge of everything that goes around them in terms of politics and things like that. He also will accept from the Senate a vote that made him Augustus. And that sort of means exalted and divinely favored. It also was an interesting title because his adopted father, his granduncle, Julius Caesar, had the same title attached to him as well in time, where the idea is going to grow, and this will not be an idea stopped by the current regime. They're going to start to look back at Julius Caesar and notice that he might have been semi-divine, that he may have been very, very directly linked to the gods and goddesses. And you'll start to see in some of the statues and some of the artwork that depict this era, usually a sign. There's some symbols of various gods and goddesses. In the case of Caesar, Augustus and Julius Caesar, the family is going to be linked to the goddess Aphrodite, called Venus in the Roman understanding of those same gods that they took from the Greeks. So now there's, like with Alexander the Great, this claim to be more than a mere mortal, more than just a man, onto the idea of somehow being divinely favored, linked to the gods. It's an interesting idea. We've seen it before in other civilizations, and now it appears it's going to be back an important element in the way in which the Romans think about what they're doing. How he is going to do this is that he is excellent. Now that he is Augustus, all right, Augustus Caesar, he, who is now used to be called Octavian, remember, I don't want to make sure we lose track of who he is. Octavian, who's now Julius Caesar, is very systematic. He recognizes that one of the errors that his father had made was to pardon some of his enemies or allow them to keep some of their political or economic abilities. And so what he wants to do is he's going to be systematic. He's going to place a military force called the Praetorian Guard in Rome. That's never been done before. He's going to control the commerce of Rome. He is going to call himself the chief priest of Rome, the Pontifex Maximus. And that word later on will become corrupted down to the idea of pontiff, the chief priest of Rome, that later on will be adopted by and used by the Bishop of Rome, who will also call himself the Pope. There's some links here between power and religion. Octavian, now called Caesar Augustus, is controlling everything in government. The elections for Senate and other posts or the elections of senators to other posts keeps going, but nobody gets any job in Rome unless he says so. He is behind the scenes the ultimate political power. He holds all the major offices. He has all his people in the right positions. Nothing happens unless he says so. And remember, this includes things like the tax base that he controls. He has control over the army. He has control over religion and economics. He has absolute control. So let's stop for a second. The senators wanted to get rid of Julius Caesar to stop this trend of all power going to one man, and now it actually has come true in the next generation. The thing he does not do, though, is as Caesar Augustus lives a very, very long time and exerts a lot of power, he never adopted the word rex as one of the titles that he wanted. He accepted lots of other titles, but he did not accept rex. That is the old Roman word for king, because remember, thinking back in Roman history, and they think about how they'd broken free of the monarchs, broken free of the kings in the past, the reputation of a king in Roman society and culture and history was of something very, very bad. So even though Caesar Augustus now is exerting massive authority economically, religiously, militarily, and politically, he doesn't accept the title of king. All the other titles he does accept equate with and are actually controlling aspects of all Roman society. He doesn't need that last one. Be sure to read very carefully through this section called the Principate and how Julius Caesar is going to see all of his power transferred to his adopted son, and how that is going to carry through and be sort of the end of the Roman Republic and the beginnings of an empire. And of course, take a look at any sample questions that can help you with this area as well.